Alright guys, so this is section 5.1, experimenting with Confederation, right? So this is dealing with the new government right after the revolution ends. Alright, so the lesson objective here is to understand the conflicting views of the role of government in American life, right? This is still kind of a fundamental political question that still goes on today, right? And also, what are going to be the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation? That's such a question, because we're going to find that the government that they set up after the Revolutionary War was over was not effective.
And one thing to really keep in mind is a lot of people assume following the Revolutionary War, America's created, we have the Constitution, it's signed, so on and so forth, but really that's not the case. Right after the Revolutionary War, there's actually a totally different government under the Articles of Confederation, and what you learn, or in 5.1, and will continue to learn, is that it was a total failure for a lot of reasons.
Alright, so the idea here is a republic, right? So a republic is a government where you elect representatives to make the laws for you, right? The Americans are debating whether a republic will work, and there's never been a country as large as the United States that ever effectively had a republican government, right? Everyone's always had a king, right? So, and also, what is that role of that government going to be? How intrusive is it going to be in life? What is it going to do in life, right? How is it going to affect you from a daily basis? Is it going to control things, not control things? And these are all questions that they're trying to figure out as they're making this new government.
And one issue that a lot of colonists were very concerned about is following the Revolutionary War, many colonists were frustrated by a government that they thought was too closely manipulating their lives, telling them what to sell, what not to sell, what to buy, what not to buy, and how many taxes to pay to whom. So the balance becomes, how can we have a federal government that will keep all of these states together, but at the same time not give that federal government too much power where it's intruding upon the natural rights of its citizens?
Sure. So big things that they were debating, the Continental Congress, right, is representation. Like, how are states going to be represented? Is it by states? Is it by state population? Are big states like Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New York going to be able to control everything? Or will small states like Rhode Island or Delaware or Georgia with little populations have an equal voice in government? Right? So under the Articles of Confederation, each state got one vote in the Continental Congress, which has allowed the smaller states a lot of power. Like Rhode Island just said no to everything.
That's a huge issue, because in order to amend any of the Articles of Confederation, you need all 13 states to sign off on it. So if one state was obstinate, like Rhode Island often was, and then New York later was, then nothing could get done. And this is the basic principle of the difference between the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. Under the Articles of Confederation, the Americans who lived in each state viewed themselves as a member of the state. Each state maintained its own autonomy and its own importance. And all the Articles of Confederation did was basically bring them together in a loosely confederated group so they could make a few decisions here and there together. But overall, each state operated on its own, which is a huge issue when all those states are, say, being attacked by another country. They need to operate together with unity.
I mean, states have their own currency, they would tax each other on imports and exports, they almost treat each other like separate countries and not states in one country, right? The division of power was another thing, right? As people that saw themselves as Virginians or Pennsylvanians or New Yorkers before they saw themselves as Americans, how much power the federal or national government is going to have is going to be a big issue, because people wanted their states to have more power than the national government. Probably the only good thing that the Articles of Confederation government was able to do is the Land Ordinance and the Northwest Ordinance in 1785 and 1787. Right? So they take this land that had been taken from England after the Revolutionary War, and they're able to split it up and they plan out a bunch of new states that are going to be able to join the Union when they're ready, right? And that's Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, and parts of Minnesota.
And the reason this is really the only good thing that came out of it is because America has all of this open land, and up to this point it was basically just surveyors, men going to the western land, laying claim to it, paying some pittance for it, and then making huge profits off of it. But there's no real structure on how to move to these areas, how many people you need to have a state constitution, how you officially apply for statehood, how you develop boundaries. So these actually stuck around for quite a while and were very important as America continues to move all the way out to the Pacific.
Probably another very important thing Northwest Ordinance did in 1787, it also banned slavery in all of those states. So that's actually going to set up a part of that north versus south sectionalism that we're going to see all the way up until still today.
Yeah.
All right?
So, like we mentioned, the Articles of Confederation had a huge amount of issues, and just the premise that it was a loosely confederated group of states is really the biggest issue. But when we get into the details, you see how that causes other issues that ripple apart from it. There are huge political and economic issues under the Articles, the first being, like Mr. Manelsky mentioned, the interest of the state, not the nation. And here's the problem. We saw this during the Revolutionary War. George Washington and the Continental Army had trouble getting supplies. Why? Because the only supplies they actually received had to be volunteered from states. And states want to look out for their own interests first. So the problem here is that the Articles of Confederation and the Confederation Congress can ask a state to pay a tax, but they can't make a state pay a tax. And if I'm Maryland and Mr. Manelsky's Delaware, then I can say, yeah, sure, I'll pay taxes when he pays taxes, and vice versa. I'll pay taxes when Virginia pays, I'll pay taxes when New Jersey pays. So then what happens is all 13 state representatives just stand around saying, well, I'm not doing it until he does it. And no one's willing to all jump in at the same time. So what that breeds is that doesn't breed a sense of unity. Instead, it breeds a sense of disconnectedness. Additionally, national debt. So if we can't bring in taxes, how are we going to pay off the national debt? This is a huge problem. They borrowed a ton of money during the Revolutionary War. And then public debt. How about all of these soldiers that you're owed money to? How about all of these soldiers that come back to their farms like Daniel Shays and have no money left? The continental dollar is not worth anything. They're promised all of these things during the war, but there's no way to pay them because there's no way to tax. And that is the number one issue with the Articles of Confederation. They had no way to tax the people effectively.
And also, kind of how the governments can deal with other nations is a big thing, right? The conflict to European powers over North America is not over once the United States becomes an independent nation, right? Spain gobbles up a bunch of territory, right? So you have the Spanish in the south, you have the Spanish in Louisiana. The Spanish actually closed off access to the Mississippi River to Americans, right? If you live in New York, that's not really that big of a deal. But if you're living in Ohio or Western Virginia, that is a big deal, right? You need the Mississippi to get things out to the port, get things to New Orleans and out to the East Coast to sell your goods, right? So there's kind of these sectional things that the new nation's not really very good at handling these new competition from the European powers who basically think they can bully America around because of the new killing block. That's it. All right, guys. Thank you for watching. That's the end of 5.1. We'll pick up later on 5.2.
And remember, if you have any questions, feel free to ask your history teacher, and we would be glad to explain it a bit further. Thanks.